Welcome to Product Momentum, a community of thought leaders and learners coming together to celebrate the product people who are shaping our way ahead. Inspired by our most pressing questions and insightful guests, we'll explore the challenges you face and offer practical, hands-on guidance your team can implement today. This is Product Momentum. Here are your hosts, Sean Flaherty and Sean Murray.
Sean, that was an awesome episode.
It was
Bukky
different.
Adebayo, Rye Castillo, talking about a really interesting topic, building products for a technical audience, right? We got some great quotes out of it. What'd you think?
It was amazing. We talked about siloing, how to know when you see siloing on teams, like what to do about it. Like there's some really good content in there.
Yeah, and they work awesome as a team, the two of them, right?
Bounce a lot of things off each other.
They've got a great bond, right? And there's a quote at the end, you shipped your org chart. So listen to the end.
Yeah, you can see the results of how you're organized in the product. I thought that was pretty valuable insight.
Pretty cool, right?
Yeah. Let's get after it.
Let's do it.
All right.
We are here with Bukky Adebayo and Rye Castillo. Bukky is a leader of high-performing product engineering teams, and Rye is a self-described curious generalist. I want to learn more about that, but you are here at industry talking about designing products for technical teams or technical audiences. So what is that? Why did that become how did that become your focus?
So we've both spent a lot of time working on technical products at GitHub, HashiCorp. And
wow.
One of the things that's super interesting about it is, especially since we were the least technical people on our teams, was we were like, hey, we've done this a few times. There's something really scary about it for folks who aren't particularly technical, where they're like, do I have to know how to code? Do I have to know how Kubernetes works? And it's the thing that we really wanted to talk about was, no, you have to bring the skills that you already have to this new context, to building for technical audiences. So the same user research skills still work, the same synthesizing skills still work, all of that still works. And so you can just keep doing that, but now it's with Kubernetes and more technical things.
Yeah.
That's
great context. I think we have a lot of, I have friends in the industry right now who all of a sudden are like, well, now I'm on teams that are building APIs, and I'm reading up on what an API is, and all of a sudden I have to figure out how to design this. And so it's refreshing to hear that it's the same problems, you just have to frame it a different way.
Yeah.
That's great.
And I think the other piece is what's cool about working on technical products is you actually have experts on the team, right? You don't have to be an expert on designing APIs because there's a whole team of engineers who use APIs every day, know what an ergonomic API looks like. You just have to include them in the process. And I think that's the challenge. Is how do you include engineers in a way that's actually meaningful?
Including them in the process is the key, though, right?
Yeah.
As product leaders, we're always dealing with technical people. So this is just, instead of dealing with customers who aren't technical, that's the key difference here. Building products for technical people to use, like APIs, for example. Interesting.
All right. So what's a curious generalist? and how has that helped in this journey of building products for technical audiences?
Yeah, I have not nailed myself down to any particular niche. I like dev tools. I started out doing front end and design, and I'm on the design side of the house. And so I just find it really interesting to see different perspectives. And I think that served me well when we were working together at HashiCorp, because I was involved in both the design side, working with Bukky on the product side, and then had some background on a little bit of what the engineers were doing. But again, that's where the kind of gulf happens, is oh, I'm not technical enough. Can I actually help the team when they're this technical? But having that sense of curiosity, I think really helps to feel like we're not in our little silos. We're able to work together and be curious about hey, what are you doing? Can you show me how can we pair together?
Okay.
So yeah.
So what are signs that teams are getting siloed?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think if you could ask your development team, what is your customer's pain point? What do your customers say? Who are your customers? And if they don't know, who knows? Is that being siloed within product or design? And does design know what's happening in product and engineering? If you're not knowing what's happening with your other teams, then by its that very nature, you're siloed, I think.
Yeah. And what happens when teams get siloed?
I mean, I think you end up spending a lot of time, like, what I would almost call over documenting. So, like, I think one of the things that when we were doing a lot of deep collaboration is there were actually a lot of things that are, I don't want to say left unsaid, but were like understood. And if you asked everyone on the team, they would say the same thing. So we didn't have to spend as much time writing the detailed PRDs with every single like user acceptance test and all of those things, because we'd internalized this is where the bar is, this is what the customer needs, and this is what's important for us to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So coming from the design side of the house, working with somebody on the product side of the house, building products for technical audiences, what is something that surprised you the most in this process, like as you got going?
That's a good question.
That was a really good question.
Yeah. I think back to something that you mentioned in the talk, which is that a lot of times the questions that you get from the engineering team don't come formed as questions. They come as like very kind of suspicious, like almost like contempt, like we don't believe like what you're doing. Like it's not phrased as a question. It comes as more of like, oh gosh, like we've got to come up with a good reason for why we're doing this. But as Bukky explains, there is a question underneath it. And once you find out what that is, like then that person eventually turns out to be like a very strong supporter of what the team is doing. It's just that like you have to recognize that like it's phrased in this way that's kind of guarded. That's what comes to mind for me.
By their very nature, technical audiences or products you're building for technical users, they're smarter. I mean, they're intelligent, especially in their domain, whatever domain you may be building a product in. HashiCorp, GitHub, great examples, right? They're smart. So along with intelligence comes a certain amount of, let's say, a lack of humility sometimes, right? And there's a defensiveness too. Like,
yes.
And, I find another unique feature of that sort of audience is they tend to not be so expressive.
Mm-hmm.
They're often more introverted. Like, not always, but certainly there's some patterns there that you have to learn to deal with as a product leader.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
So how do you, I think one of the challenges that I have when I'm designing products is discovering that user and trying to not make a lot of assumptions about the user, right? You want to start from kind of like a clean slate. That's going to be kind of hard when you have developers working on a product for a technical audience, right? So how do you get them to kind of separate from what they think the developer wants to treating that developer more, to treating their audience more like a user?
Empathize with the audience, right?
That is $1 million questions. Like many tears were
We
shed
found our
on
next
that.
business venture, Sean. There we go.
I think some of it is like there are a couple of things I would say. One is engineers are pretty smart, right?
Yeah.
And so what we found were there were engineers on the team who were like, I mean, like people keep saying this, but like that hasn't been my experience. So there's already like people are pretty critical of the product direction, like, and when it doesn't make sense, when there's cognitive dissonance. So like that is one thing, like relying on that a little bit. And the other thing, and that took me a minute to learn, I think both of us a while to learn, was we couldn't do what we did at other companies where maybe the designer and the PM and maybe a user researcher would go talk to the customer and bring that insight back to the team. Because the team would go, no, I'm a developer. You don't know anything. And I'm like, fair enough. And so bringing them into those conversations to literally hear from the customers themselves, to watch the customer not know how to use like the initial versions of the product where it was like extremely technical people were confused the entire time.
Yes.
And so watching that confusion and being like, you see it, right? Like we're not making this up. And this is somebody who has a decade of DevOps experience. So they're not a novice. They're confused. And so like, I think you actually have to have the engineers experience the pain and see the disconnect. And there's like also a broader answer to this too, is one of the things I also started doing was a lot of frameworks where I would be like, well, we know that a DevOps person in a startup is actually quite different from a DevOps person at a large enterprise.
Oh, yeah,
so starting to add that nuance so folks can be like, oh, you're right. Like, even though I'm a developer, there are developers in all sorts of contexts that are different from the context that I exist in.
Yeah. So you got any tips for us? And how do we build empathy with between the technical users and the technical team?
as you were saying that, I thought of something we did where it sounds so simple, but this just kind of, I think, to go back to the siloing and just like how piecemeal different things can be, we had different features that as we were shipping out, we decided, hey, let's kind of have different groups from engineering go through and like use these use case scenarios and write out how it works. And engineers were so confused using the features they had worked on, but like individually and like seeing it as a whole as an end-to-end process without even talking with customers yet. They were like, hey, do you know how, like, where I'm supposed to go for this? And like asking each other, like, how to use the thing because they hadn't considered the end-to-end process and like how the cognitive overload and like the effect it has when you're like out of the context of developing it and thinking about code all day. So that was one step that I think I noticed a change.
Yeah. And I think again, just having them sit in usability tests and conversations with customers. And I think giving developers permission to speak in those conversations. Cause I think, especially because developers aren't used to being in customer calls. So I remember some of the first ones I did with developers, they were so uncomfortable. Like, do I have to say anything? I don't want to say anything.
Yeah, that's a problem. It's like I said, they're not so expressive. Like you gotta get it out of them. And this is your job. You gotta get the ideas out of them,
100%. And like, I would explicitly like 30 minutes in be like, does anyone have any questions? Like, was something confusing to you? And then afterwards, also being like, you asked a great question. Thank you so much for asking that question. Yeah. Like, we had a really good example that we talk about where we had a customer and he was talking about his QA environment and his QB environment. And I was like, QA, QB, yeah, sure, that makes sense. And an engineer, when I opened it up, was like, what's QB? And he was like, yeah, we have QA, but we had more things we wanted to test. So we needed a QB environment. And I was like, what? And he was like, it's actually challenging to manage both of these environments and make sure that they're, up to par to testing. And so we learned about this really cool pain point that this customer is having because engineer was there. Engineer was also confused, but asked the question. and like, I think that's also a really big way of bridging that gap is making sure they're in the room and making sure that they feel comfortable speaking and that their input is appreciated.
Yeah, making sure they feel heard.
Yeah.
I like that tactic of kind of like validating their like, hey, validating your social skill set, right? Like, hey, you did ask a great question and you should feel welcome to ask more, right?
100%.
Yeah, like coaching that behavior in a way.
And I always like think about, this is such a weird thing to think about, but Oprah said in all of her interviews, at the end of every single interview she had over her 25-year show, everyone, once they got off the seat was like, did I do good? And so like just being like, thank you for showing up.
Affirmation.
You did great. You asked a good question goes a long way because we all need that. And I'm sure at the end of this podcast we'll be like, was that good?
Yeah. Is that our first Oprah reference too?
It was. That was our first Oprah reference.
Yes.
So we're moving up. We're moving up.
Outstanding.
What are the other key takeaways that you want the audience to have today? I think your topic is really unique and it's building off of more unique topics that have, been a part of industry this year. We're hearing about so many different things this year. So like, what's the key takeaway that you want the audience to have?
I mean, I think the overarching theme is collaboration.
Yeah.
Just considering the engineers to be part of the team and not people you have to like fight against essentially, because like in a lot of organizations, it can seem that way, or in like engineering heavy organizations, it can feel like you're fighting an uphill battle and it's like us versus them. And it's like really building relationships and forming, again, kind of that social aspect of the team and like affirming each other, I think is
just to bring it back, really breaking down the silos.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think in larger organizations, there's a natural tendency to move towards the silos because engineers, if their goals aren't clear and there is a lack of alignment and the organization's big, they tend to move towards like, just tell me what to do. Mm-hmm. Just give me, and not be involved in the overarching understanding of the consumers and the empathy and you're not going to get ideas out of them. And they're smart. So we want their ideas. We need them to be motivated, to be aligned, to really care about the product. But I've seen it over and over again, this tendency to kind of move into commodity roles. Like just give me the specifications. I'll build it and I'll throw it back over the wall. And that's a mistake. It's a big mistake.
Especially when you're building technical products.
Yeah.
And but then again, you balance the line of like, oh, I know who the customer is because I'm a developer versus but it is so it's like, like walking that fine line of using their knowledge and like also forming that like kind of genuine bond with them to be able to not be siloed.
I love that.
I used to have this philosophy that all a developer really wanted was to be right. Right? That was their number one thing was, I want to be right. And I think what's changed in the last decade for me has been, it's not that they want to be right, it's that they want to be a part of the solution. And they feel they're planting this flag, this thing where I want to be right. They're planting this flag because they don't feel like they were a part of this original solution.
I think they just want to be heard more than
Yeah.
anything else.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Giving
Everybody
them the space
does.
to do that.
Giving them the space to communicate their ideas and talk it out. Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really
Awesome.
I agree.
We asked 2 questions at the end.
Okay.
Right? So the first one is, what are you reading right now?
How are you up-leveling your skills?
Oh, well, it's funny you ask because I'm reading a book called Private Government about the concept of the workplace actually being a form of private government and how that affects people who work there. Very interesting, kind of like sort of touches on some of these topics. So yeah, that's what I've been reading recently.
That's awesome. What about you, Bukky?
I have been reading The Resilience Myth by Soraya Chemaly. And it's essentially about the myth of resilience, individual resilience, that resilience actually exists in a social context. So it's like that what makes us more resilient is our connections to other people and like more of that. And I think that like that also, I guess, ties in a little bit with our talk, because I think that especially like as a product manager, there's been this like push to be the CEO of the product. I know people are moving away from that, thank God, but like to have all the answers, to be the person who's like resilient and figuring things out. And I mean, we're giving this talk together because I think I'm realizing more and more that I do my best work and I'm more resilient when I'm on a team where folks are flexing into different roles and are working together.
You take advantage of everyone's skills, knowledge, and passion, right?
Exactly.
You get a better result.
Yeah.
The physical embodiment of breaking down silos. I'm giving a speech with somebody else on stage. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you guys define innovation? Independently. How do you define innovation?
Ooh. I mean, I guess like it's something that hasn't been done before, but is it really like in context of our talk, is it doing something in a different way that maybe you hadn't thought of before, that when the product comes out, like, are people going to be able to tell the way that you worked on it? Like, a friend of ours once told me, you shipped your org chart. Like, you can tell by the finished product.
Shipped
Like,
your org chart. Oh, I love
like
that.
you can see,
I haven't heard that before.
you can,
I love
going
it.
back to the silos, you can see like if teams were siloed, when the product finally comes out, like your audience will be able to tell. And so I think like it might not sound innovative to work differently together, but I do think like, how else do you find innovative solutions if you're not willing to change the way that you work on it, like how you arrive at the final solution? So
I love that. Now me wanting to borrow that answer. That's such a good answer. You know, I think it's like, I kind of want to broaden innovation out of like, oh, we're working on AI or working on something like that. Yeah. Where I think it's, in a lot of ways, it's also all of the small things that folks are doing in their daily lives to like
improve.
Yeah. To improve.
Every day.
Yeah. And I think that those like mini innovations all add up, like not to use agile, but like all the iterations add up to like big innovations. And so I think I'm trying to think of a really good example of this, but like my mom is in food science. And so it's the things like when she's like, oh, we don't have any vinegar, you can use lemon juice, like those kinds of smaller innovations. And then all of a sudden you have a completely new recipe that was different from the original.
It's better sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, what did we do here?
Yeah. Yes. And so I think of that and giving everyone, not just technologists, permission to be innovative and to try things.
I think, the strongest teams are the ones where you're getting input and ideas and passion from everybody on the team, not just the leader. And I love that. Well, thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank
you
you
for inviting us.
This was awesome.
Showing up to industry.
You, like in a half hour, you're going on stage, right? Just do what you did here. You're going to kill it. right?
Awesome.
We won't have any gotcha questions. Though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks again for joining us.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for today. In line with our goals of transparency and listening, we really want to hear from you. Sean and I are committed to reading every piece of feedback that we get, so please leave a comment or a rating wherever you're listening to this podcast. Not only does it help us continue to improve, but it also helps the show climb up the rankings so that we can help other listeners move, touch, and inspire the world just like you're doing. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next episode.